NUs. In the summer of 2012, a married couple, both in their early 30s, decided to escape the city's hustle and bustle for a couple of weeks. Exhausted from their daily jobs, she was a teacher, he worked in sales. They yearned for solitude. Through the vast expanse of the internet, they managed to find a modest cabin nestled in a forest, not far from the picturesque Lake George in northern New York State. This dwelling was far from luxurious, a small wooden cottage comprising a kitchen, a living room, a bedroom, and a tiny bathroom. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi access, just pristine nature and absolute silence. The couple considered it the perfect spot for hiking, fishing, and complete relaxation. Loading their car with provisions, a few books, and essential camping gear, they set off in early July. The cabin was cozily situated at the end of a dirt road, encircled by a dense ring of ancient pines. It gave the impression of a secluded sanctuary, but in the best possible way. Time twos, approximately 100 yards away, through thick undergrowth, the silhouette of another structure was visible, looking significantly older and appearing completely abandoned. The paint on its walls was peeling. The windows were covered in a layer of grime, and its overall appearance exuded desolation, as if no one had lived there for many years. Initially, this sight didn't cause them much concern. Perhaps it was just an old shed or something similar. On their second day, as the man was chopping wood neatly stacked near the shed, he unexpectedly noticed a person emerging from that very abandoned cabin. The man was about 50 years old, with gray in hair, an unshaven beard, and dressed in faded jeans and a flannel shirt. The man waved at him, and the stranger returned the gesture, then approached to say hello. "My name is Jonathan," the stranger said. His voice was calm, quite soft. He explained that he lived there year-round, slowly renovating the house in his spare time. However, the house certainly didn't look renovated, but the man decided not to pursue the topic. They exchanged a few words about the weather, how hot the summer had been, and Jonathan mentioned a few excellent fishing spots on the lake. Soon Angelina joined them, and together they laughed about how city folk like themselves tried to adapt to life in the woods. Jonathan seemed like a perfectly normal person, just a quiet guy who preferred to live away from civilization. After that first encounter, the man began to see Jonathan daily, around 4 in the afternoon. It became a kind of habit. He would sit on his porch with a cup of tea, and his neighbor would approach, or the man himself would go to him if he didn't appear. Their conversations covered a wide range of topics. One day they talked about the best hiking trails. Jonathan recommended a circular route around the lake that took about 2 hours to complete. Another time, cars were the subject of discussion. The neighbor mentioned that he owned an old Ford pickup truck that frequently broke down. He was interested in their city life, and the man shared details about his job and how Angelina loved teaching children. Jonathan, in turn, shared stories about his childhood spent in these parts, traditional autumn deer hunting, and the like. Nothing deep or strange, just casual neighborly chats. Angelina, though she found him a little eccentric for living alone in such a dilapidated shack, wasn't overly concerned. One afternoon, she even baked cookies and offered some to Jonathan. This continued for about 5 days. They seemed to have fully immersed themselves in the calm rhythm of vacation life. In the mornings, they enjoyed coffee and scrambled eggs. In the afternoons, they read books or napped. and in the evenings they grilled burgers and watched the sunsets. The man began to look forward to these 4 p.m. conversations. They added variety to their peaceful leisure time. Then, on the 6th day of their vacation, the man decided to go for a solo hike. Angelina preferred to stay home and relax, feeling a bit tired from all the previous walks. The man grabbed his backpack, a water bottle, and a trail map, then set off around noon. The hike was magnificent. He climbed a hill with a stunning view of the lake and walked through a dense forest. He even spotted a deer and took many photos on his phone. However, the walk took longer than planned, and he didn't return until about 3:30 p.m. As he approached their cabin, something felt wrong. The front door was wide open, swaying slightly in the gentle breeze. He called for Angelina, but there was no answer. His heart pounded. He thought perhaps she had accidentally left the door open, but that was completely unlike her. Entering inside, he found a complete mess. Chairs were overturned, kitchen drawers pulled out. Their belongings were scattered across the floor, as if someone had rummaged through them. "Angelina!" he shouted, running through the rooms. The living room was completely ransacked. Sofa cushions were flipped over. The bedroom door was closed, but she was nowhere to be found. Panic seized him. He checked the bathroom. It was empty. The man grabbed his phone to call her, but there was no signal, as usual. To get reception, they had to drive a mile down the road. He thought, maybe she went for help or something, but then why the mess? At that moment, he remembered Jonathan. Perhaps he had seen something. The man rushed outside and ran towards his cabin. The door was closed, the windows dark, as usual. He knocked hard, shouting, "Jonathan, are you there? Something happened to us." There was no answer. He knocked again, louder, but nothing. The man tried the doorknob. It was locked. Peering into the grimy window, he saw that the inside was empty, just shadows and old furniture. Jonathan was nowhere to be found. Frustrated and overwhelmed with fear, the man returned to his cabin. As he entered, he heard a noise from the bedroom, a faint creak. "Angelina," he called. The door slowly opened, and there she was, peeking out, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. She rushed to him, hugging him tightly, trembling. "Oh God, you're back," she whispered. He hugged her back, asking what had happened. She pulled him into the bedroom and closed the door, as if still afraid of something. She told him everything, her voice shaking. She had been napping on the bed around 1 p.m. The cabin was quiet, broken only by the sound of birds outside. The outdoor silence, broken only by the chirping of birds, suddenly exploded with a deafening crash. It was an unmistakable sound. The front door had been forced open. In that instant, Angelina sprang up, her heart pounding wildly in her chest like a trapped bird. Cautiously opening the bedroom door a crack, she peered out, and the sight that met her eyes made her blood run cold. Jonathan stood in the living room. In his hand, a large kitchen knife, meant for carving meat, gleamed menacingly with its sharp blade. He uttered not a word, simply stood there, slowly looking around with a completely blank, emotionless expression on his face. For a moment, Angelina froze, paralyzed by fear, then abruptly slammed the bedroom door shut and hastily bolted it. Retreating, she instinctively grabbed a heavy lamp, turning it into an improvised weapon, and dove under the bed, desperately trying to breathe as quietly as possible. Soon he approached the door. First, there was a quiet, hesitant knock. Then it grew stronger, turning into insistent pounding. "Angelina," he called, his voice surprisingly calm, just as he usually addressed her during their daily conversations. "Are you in there?" She didn't answer, remaining motionless, deeply hidden, her only wish for him to leave quickly. After about a minute, the knocking on the bedroom door stopped, but Angelina clearly heard Jonathan moving around the cabin. Sounds of drawers being opened and items being overturned gave the impression that he was methodically searching for something. She remained in her hiding place for another half-hour, paralyzed with terror, not daring to move until she heard her partner calling her name. He was completely stunned by what had happened. Questions swirled in his mind. Why would Jonathan do such a thing? What compelled him to break into the house, and with a knife? What exactly could he have been looking for? Or were his intentions far more sinister than a simple search? Did he mean to harm Angelina? His true motives remained utterly unclear, shrouded in darkness. But one thing was obvious. This event had scared them both to the core. Without losing a minute, they decided to act. The man immediately dialed 911 and explained the entire situation in detail to the operator. The police assured them that officers would be dispatched to the scene. Approximately an hour later, 2 law enforcement officers, a man and a woman from the local sheriff's department, arrived at the cabin. They listened carefully to the entire story, the daily conversations with Jonathan, the fact of the break-in, and the shocking moment Angelina saw him with a knife in his hand. The officers meticulously recorded all details, inspected the interior of the cabin, and took fingerprints from the damaged front door through which the intruder had gained entry. After this, the police inquired about the neighboring cabin. The cabin owners pointed them in the direction, and the officers went to inspect it. They soon returned, reporting that the cabin was empty. The door was now unlocked, though it had usually been kept locked before, but no one was found inside. Only a layer of dust covered all surfaces, and there were old tin cans and a few articles of clothing. It seemed as though someone had been living there without permission very recently. The officers radioed in to request information about the property owner. It was at this moment that the situation began to take a truly sinister turn. The police contacted the owner of their rented cabin, Mr. Harlan, who lived in the city and managed several properties. He soon arrived, a portly elderly man in a pickup truck. They immediately asked him about the abandoned cabin next door. Mr. Harlan frowned, clearly puzzled, and stated that no one should have been living there, as the house had been vacant for many years. He explained that the true owner, a man named Jonathan Ellis, had disappeared without a trace 5 years ago, in 2007. Jonathan Ellis had lived there alone after his wife's death, and then one day simply vanished into thin air, leaving no clues. Due to legal issues surrounding his disappearance, the house remained uninhabited. Mr. Harlan added that he had driven past many times, but had never seen anyone there. Time paused. A chill ran down the spine of the man, telling this story as he realized what was happening. Jonathan, that's what the man introduced himself as, he said. The police exchanged significant glances. They requested a description of the stranger, and it strikingly matched the little they knew about the missing owner from old police reports. Gray hair, a beard, roughly the same age. But if it was indeed him, where had he been all these 5 years? And why had he returned now to squat in his own long-abandoned home. The police thoroughly searched the entire surrounding area with specially trained dogs that same night, but found no traces. There wasn't a single footprint leading away, not the slightest sign of his presence. The police put forth several theories. Perhaps it was a vagrant who simply used someone else's name, or it was indeed the missing person, possibly feral or having undergone some inexplicable changes. They couldn't give a definitive answer. The cabin's occupants didn't stay a minute longer. They hastily packed their belongings and drove home that same night, stopping at a motel along the way. A week later, the police called, reporting no new leads. The case remained open but was essentially hopeless. Law enforcement suggested it might have been a botched robbery. However, the presence of the knife didn't fit this theory at all, creating a dissonance. Years passed, but the narrator still ponders what happened. Was it the real Jonathan, returned from oblivion with some twisted purpose for breaking in? Or someone merely pretending to be him? Like a ghost from the past, he spoke with him daily at 4 p.m, gradually gaining trust, biding his time. Whatever his true intentions, the narrator is haunted by the realization that they never learned the truth. During her first summer after starting college, a young woman was determined not to go home and work her monotonous, boring store job again. She craved adventure, new experiences, and freedom. She and her roommate, Chloe, managed to get summer waitressing jobs in a picturesque resort town a few hours up the coast. The place was like something out of a postcard. Charming little shops, a constantly bustling boardwalk, and miles of beautiful sandy beaches stretching to the horizon. The girls rented a tiny but rather expensive apartment, and each felt like she was finally starting to live a real, independent adult life. About a month after they arrived, she met Leo. He worked as a cook at a restaurant next door to theirs. Leo was the epitome of the kind of guy you'd expect to meet in a seaside town, tan, laid back, with a charming smile that seemed to make everyone feel like they were the only person in the room. He seemed to know absolutely everyone around, and possessed that indescribable, confident, and relaxed aura of a true local. He often stopped by her work during his breaks, and they had casual conversations. Time toes. He was extremely charming, funny, and she had to admit she'd developed a bit of a crush on him. One afternoon, leaning against the counter, he said with a slight smile, "You girls are always working. You just have to see the real side of this town, not just the tourist traps meant for visitors." He invited her and Chloe to a bonfire he and his friends were having that evening, emphasizing that it would be a locals-only event. Leo described a secluded cove, cleverly hidden from the main beach, where they could enjoy the view of countless stars, undisturbed by the annoying boardwalk lights. This offer sounded perfect, promising a welcome escape from the endless crowds of tourists they had to deal with all day. They readily agreed. When their shifts ended that evening, the girls changed, and grabbing a six-pack of non-alcoholic drinks, set off for the adventure, anticipating a true, authentic local experience. Their local guide, Leo, confidently led them down a winding dirt road that eventually ended at a barely visible path snaking through the sand dunes. Dusk was settling, and the only source of light came from their mobile phone screens. The rustling of tall grass swallowed the usual roar of the ocean waves, creating a sense of extraordinary detachment and eerie silence. When the girls finally pushed through the last dunes onto the sandy shore, their first mild unease set in. In their imagination, they pictured a lively crowd, energetic music, a classic beach party. Instead, before them was only a small bonfire, around which sat 3 figures. It was Leo and 2 other men. They looked significantly older than Leo, perhaps in their 30s or 40s, their faces weathered, their gazes hard. As the girls approached, they said not a word, merely staring at the newcomers with emotionless, empty eyes. Leo greeted them with, "Hey, you made it," but his usual cheerful smile seemed alien, almost strained in the flickering firelight. "Guys, this is Sarah and Chloe." The 2 men merely nodded slightly, their silence so pervasive that it seemed to absorb even the faint crackle of the fire. The atmosphere instantly became tense. This was nothing like a party. Rather, it felt like they had accidentally intruded on a private, extremely serious meeting. The girls sat down, trying to strike up casual conversation, but their attempts met a brick wall of alienation. Sarah and Chloe did most of the talking, their cheerful chatter sounding loud and out of place in the heavy silence. The older men never said a word. They just watched the newcomers intently. Then Leo produced a large, clear glass bottle with no label, filled with a pale golden liquid. "You just have to try this," he said, holding it out. "It's a special blend, the best tequila you'll ever drink." "Oh no, thank you," Sarah replied, holding up her drink. "We're good with this." "Come on, just 1 shot," Leo insisted, his charming smile even more strained. "It's what the locals drink," one of the older men grunted in agreement, never taking his eyes off the girls. There was something in his eyes that sent a chill down her spine. It was overtly predatory, piercing to the bone. The girls politely refused again, and an awkward, heavy tension hung over the small group. The men continued to drink from their bottle, passing it between them, but never for a moment stopped watching Sarah and Chloe. After about 20 minutes of this oppressive silence, Chloe suddenly clutched her stomach. "I really don't feel well," she whispered, genuine pain and alarm in her voice. "I think it's something I ate at work. Sarah, can we go?" Sarah seized on the excuse. "Yes, of course. We should probably get you home." Leo's charming facade completely dropped. "The party's just getting started," he said. "Sorry," Sarah replied with no regret in her voice. The girls stood up and headed back towards the path, their hearts pounding a frantic rhythm in their chests. They didn't say goodbye to the 2 other men, nor did they even look in their direction. The path through the dunes had now plunged into impenetrable darkness. They walked as fast as they could, trying not to run, but the sand, as if alive, clung to their feet, making movement difficult. About halfway to the car, a branch snapped loudly behind them. Both girls froze. Then they heard the distinct sound of footsteps in the sand. It wasn't just one person. They were being followed. The girls didn't even need to look at each other to know it. They just broke into a run. Adrenaline surged through their veins, giving them unnatural strength. Bursting out of the dunes, they rushed toward Sarah's old, battered car. Sarah's hands trembled so violently she could barely get the key into the lock. The footsteps grew closer, faster. Finally, the door opened, and they scrambled inside, slamming the doors shut and hitting the locks just as all 3 men appeared on the path. The men didn't yell. They didn't pound on the windows or try the handles. They simply stopped and lined up, perfectly illuminated by the car's headlights. The two older men stared, their faces blank and terrifying. And Leo, the charming local guy, slowly raised his hand. He made a small, deliberate wave, and the same smile spread across his face. It was the smile he always used, but now there was no warmth in it. It was pure, lifeless ice, the embodiment of coldness and detachment. The girls sped away, leaving them standing in the grimy parking lot. It wasn't until a week later, when they were speaking with a police officer about an entirely unrelated matter in their neighborhood, that the shocking truth came to light. The girls casually mentioned their strange campfire experience, and the officer's face visibly darkened. He strongly advised them to be careful, informing them that several young female tourists their age had been reported missing in that town over the past 5 or 6 years, their traces vanishing without a trace. He had embarked on numerous camping trips throughout his life. Some of these journeys were for leisure and recreation, others as part of his professional duties, and still others for special training. He deeply understood and always honored the laws of the wilderness. In most cases, nothing bad happens if one exercises caution and relies on common sense. However, one summer last year in the mountains of Northern California, he experienced something that could have turned into a real disaster. He wasn't alone. His young son was with him, and it was this circumstance that lent a particular, poignant intensity to the entire situation. They pitched their small tent in a modest clearing, nestled right at the edge of an ancient forest. It was autumn, and the nights were already beginning to grow noticeably colder, but the air was crisp and the sky crystal clear. The moon that night shone with extraordinary brightness, like a colossal electric lamp hanging directly above them. They had eaten dinner earlier in the evening. Nothing fancy, just packaged meals and snacks. He meticulously made sure that no supplies were left exposed, knowing full well how easily tourist carelessness could lead to serious trouble. Somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, the narrator suddenly awoke. At first, he mistook the sound for the usual rustlings of the forest, but soon realized that the noise was much heavier and portended something serious. It wasn't the light scurrying of a squirrel or a raccoon, but something large moving slowly in the darkness. Raising himself in his sleeping bag, he listened intently. The sound repeated, a steady crunch of fallen leaves and dry branches under something heavy. Slowly unzipping the tent flap just enough to peek out, he allowed his eyes to adjust to the spectral moonlight. And then he saw it. Approximately 50 to 60 feet away, just beyond their camp, stood a massive bear. The animal was colossal, its broad, massive body and head swaying slowly as it sniffed the ground. The moonlight clearly outlined its imposing contours. The narrator's heart pounded faster, but he forced himself to remain calm. His first instinct was to reach for the handgun he always kept close during hikes. He gripped the weapon tightly, not because he intended to shoot the bear, but because he recognized the need to be prepared for any eventuality. He knew that most bears do not attack unless they feel threatened or smell food. Fortunately, they had no food outside that could attract the animal, but despite this, the danger remained very real. As the narrator's gaze remained fixed on the bear, he felt movement beside him. His son was waking up. Rubbing his eyes, the boy whispered, asking what was happening. The narrator put a finger to his lips, urging silence, and gestured outside the tent. His son leaned in, looked out, and froze when his eyes fell upon the bear. The narrator noticed the fear on his face, but to the boy's credit, he remained calm and didn't make a sound. Quietly, he was told to lie still and not move. The bear continued to sniff the ground, came a little closer, then stopped again. The narrator absolutely did not want the animal to approach the tent. He understood that he had to do something without exacerbating an already tense situation. Slowly raising the pistol, he aimed at the sky and fired one warning shot. The sound of the shot exploded in the night silence and echoed repeatedly off the surrounding mountains. The bear flinched, but to the narrator's surprise and alarm, it did not run away. His heart sank with the realization that one shot had not been enough. Taking a steadying breath, he aimed again and fired a second shot into the air. This time the bear's reaction was different. It spun around abruptly, shook its head, and then hastily bolted back into the forest. The narrator watched it intently until the darkness swallowed the animal. The sound of its heavy footsteps gradually faded, once again plunging the forest into an ominous silence. His son let out the breath he had unconsciously been holding. The narrator whispered that everything was fine. The bear was gone, but he knew perfectly well that he wouldn't be able to simply fall back asleep after that. He coaxed his son to calm down and close his eyes again, but he himself remained awake for the rest of the night, sitting with the pistol on his lap, listening to every rustle. The forest, in all its indescribable beauty, can also remind a person of their true insignificance in the face of wild nature. The narrator constantly replayed scenarios in his mind of what could have happened if they hadn't exercised due caution. What if they had left food outside, or if he hadn't had a means to scare the bear away? Many tourists make serious mistakes. They try to photograph wild animals, shout to frighten them, or leave food exposed as if it doesn't matter. This is exactly how accidents happen. Most animals will not bother humans if humans do not bother them, unless something in their behavior is disrupted or they feel threatened. That night taught the narrator an important lesson. Being prepared is not just a choice when in the wild, especially when a child's safety depends on you. His son may not remember all the details now, but the narrator did. He remembered the sound of the bear's footsteps, the weight of the pistol in his hands, and the expression on his son's face when he saw what was lurking beyond the tent. When morning finally arrived, the sunlight felt like the safest and most welcome thing in the world. They packed their belongings and continued on their way, both a little more aware of how quickly a peaceful camping trip can turn into something dangerous, although nothing terrible happened. That memory stayed with the narrator forever. It wasn't the most terrifying story one could tell, but for him, it was absolutely real, and it once again reminded him of how thin the line is between safety and danger in the wild.